Hi.
Okay, well, I'm Karen Riddell from the Division of Information Technology. I think I know just about everybody here. I'm delighted you are all here, and we are here to listen to our small but mighty Fall 2010 cohort for the alternate delivery program. So Diane Alonso from Psychology is going to be presenting her first deliverable for Psych 317.
317, Cognitive Psychology. All right, thank you, Karen. All right, well, hello, and thank you all for coming out. I do appreciate, I know it's summer, and I really do appreciate you coming out. So I'm going to take you through a little PowerPoint that I put together, because I love PowerPoint, sorry. I do have that available down here, and it's on my in my folder on the website, so it kind of will help guide me so I don't get too off track. And what I'm doing is I have taken a hard copy, something I've done in hard copy in my class, which is Cognitive Psychology, and I've transferred it to an online assignment, so students will be able to do it outside of class. I'm going to give you a little background first when this comes up, if this comes up, which it will in a second. And we'll view it, slideshow. And so this is an online summary paper. And let me just give you a little background about what a summary paper is. This is something I've developed for class. I'm sure other people have things like it. But it's a review assignment. I have students do it at the end of class. In the past, I've handed out the piece of paper, and it's got about 3 questions on it. It's given weekly after each lecture. And it takes about 15 to 20 minutes for students to do this. It's open book, open notes. Students can talk if they want. They can ask me questions. And it has these 3 parts. The first part is basic information, usually 2 or 3 fill-in-the-blank kind of questions. Conceptual information is the second part, where they have to provide a short answer to a question. And the third part has them making a personal connection to the information that they've learned in class. All right. And this is an example. This is so that they can review the information while it's still in their memory before they leave the classroom for too long and a week later have forgotten everything. So this is a sample summary paper. It didn't scan very well, but it shows what it was laid out like on paper. These are the 3 brief, really quick answers. They give me some information here and some information here that's related to personal. So the problem is, when I give them the hard copy at the end of class, it can take a while. They're tired. They've been in class for, usually, I teach once a week, so it's a 2.5-hour class. They have had breaks, but they're beat. They're ready to go. Some of them take their time and they end up having to stay late, maybe being late for the next class. Some of them rush through it because they don't want to be there, they want to get going, and they're done. They've been there. Sometimes the classroom gets noisy because students might be asking me questions. They might be kind of talking among themselves. Papers rattle. I usually have about 45 students in the class. In addition, some students with disabilities, if they have accommodations, they don't have to do it in class. They're allowed extra time, so they take it home and they have a week to do it. And none of my students have complained about it yet, but it is an unfair. It's a little unfair as far as some students get one thing and some get another. And then sometimes I run late in my lecture and we simply don't have time. And I think it's a really valuable tool for students to be able to go over and review the information soon after. I think there's definitely a window where they can still remember this information, and then it starts little by little to degrade. All right, so there's my poor student in class rushing to get his work done. All right, so the benefits of providing this online are that it will free up class time. I will have shorter classes because we're using hybrid format, but it won't take those extra 15 to 20 minutes of students sitting in the classroom doing an assignment. They can work at their own pace. They'll be working from home. They can go down to the computer lab. I work at the University of Shady Grove, by the way, off-site, and we have a computer lab. Students can go there, so if they don't have access at home, they can use the computers there. They can work in a quiet environment. I have had students complain that the classroom's a little noisy, it's distracting, so when they can go home and work in their own home, that's great. And again, I don't mind if they work with other students. It's not a test. It's just a chance for them to go back over their notes, go back over the course material, and review what we did for that day. And then it's also, it evens the playing field because everyone does this outside of class. So even if I run over, my class runs late, not that it's running past the time, but even if it's running long, I don't have to feel stress and pressure to get this done so that they can get the summary paper, and they don't have to feel stressed to get it done, or I don't have to skip doing the summary paper altogether. All right, and there's my happy student. All right, so how is this implemented? I wasn't sure exactly what we wanted in this section, so I'm just telling you what I did first and then how it's used. So I created a test on Blackboard. It was a test version, and this is not a test assignment, but the same method for creating a test or assessment. And I put each of the 3 major items as a separate question. And this was just something I did for this particular one, but I'm considering using this method when I teach. I use adaptive release to do a follow-up discussion forum so that my reviewers could provide comments in the discussion forum. However, I had Blackboard issues, which I've captured in a Jing, but I now know what happened with that. But I would like to consider using adaptive release after they do the summary papers. I mentioned they have 24 hours after class to do the paper. It will go away, but maybe give them a chance to get to a discussion section where maybe they can get a little more information, have something else going on. So I think that'll be really interesting. I think adaptive release is going to be fun, so I'm getting a little excited with that. So as far as this particular assignment, as I mentioned, they have 24 hours from class to complete it. I can show you a Jing if you want. We can get silly, or I can just show you the method on Blackboard. Which would you prefer?
You show us on Blackboard.
All right. Actually, I have to get out. Well, I have to, let's see. There is, do what? Oh, Alt Tab. Yeah. There we go. All right, so here's my summary paper. And the students simply click on the link. They go to that section. I'll have all the summary papers in the same area. And they click on the summary paper. Then they'll click the begin button to start. And it comes up. Eventually, there we go. And I have the 3 questions. The directions are given at the top, followed by 3 questions. I'm going to get down so I can type. And question 1 asks them for their short fill-in-the-blank kind of information. Identify the following types of long-term memory. Memory for personal events, such as what you had for breakfast this morning, is episodic memory. Okay. Memory for skills, such as how to play the piano, procedural, EDURAL memory. And memory for facts, such as what is 2 + 2, is semantic memory. All right, so these are my short answers, and hopefully I spelled everything right. And I can save these answers if I want, or I can save everything at the end. I'll go ahead and save these now. Okay. And then I go down to the next question that asks, what does the serial position curve tell us about primacy and recency effects? And make sure to explain how they relate to short-term and long-term memory. And again, this is a conceptual question. We go over it in class. The students understand it, but I now want them to put it in their own words. So they'll give me an answer here. They'll type something in. And after they've completed that one, or in any order they want to go, this is just going to all be up there at once. I ask them to think of a method other than rote memorization as to how they learn, how they study when they study for a test, for example. Describe what it is you do, when you use it, and how you feel it helps you. So they'll give the last answer here. Oops. And then they can submit the entire. They can save all their answers. They can go out and they can submit it if they want at this point. I confirm that. And it tells me that the test is submitted. And then it will come back and let me know if I've done well on this. Or some of these I may or may not use grading because it really does require having the correct spelling and everything. But they can see their answers here. And that is it for the summary paper. Okay, so let me go back now to the slideshow. All right. So in terms of feedback, I had a student reviewer and a peer reviewer, and my student reviewer was a former student from a class. She took the Psych 317 cognitive psychology class and has done the summary papers. She really liked it. She's very enthusiastic, and liked that it was online. So I just basically copied her response here. And this was from my peer reviewer, who's a colleague at UMBC at Shady Grove, who's in the social work program, and she liked it too. I didn't really get too much more, which was fine. It's a pretty straightforward process, and happy people. I get silly, I'm sorry. All right, so next steps. First, in terms of this, I'm going to create summary papers for each of the lectures. I definitely want to be able to use this for the class. I'm thinking of trying out those adaptive release strategies to see what we can do next. And then again, just making sure that my directions are clear and straightforward. It was great for my peer and my student. They're both pretty on top of this stuff. I know that some students might get confused, so I probably will need a few, maybe the first 1 or 2 to really walk it through. I'll have Jing explanations, but really make sure that they know what they're doing. I don't want anyone to miss out just because they couldn't get to the computer or get to the summary paper within the 24-hour time limit. So that's next steps for this particular deliverable. And then it got me to thinking about other options, other things I want to do. So one of them, I got excited when I saw the marriage and family video, where she did a blog. She had students work on a project and then use a blog or possibly a wiki to do some sort of, to address the questions. And it was not so much a right or wrong type of issue, but thinking together as a group and coming up with ideas. So I'd like to do it. My class is going to be based very much on model building and experiments, because in cognitive psychology, it's a lot about experiments and models of the brain, models of thinking, models of problem solving. So I want to get the students thinking in terms of that. So I'd like to propose a few different models, have different groups address those models online, either again in a blog or a wiki or discussion, and come to class to discuss those. That's one idea, one thing I plan to use probably between my first and second class. And then some online experiments using CogLab, which is a really nice online system. It provides online experiments. The students can do these at home by themselves, in groups, whatever they want. It gives a bunch of different options here. You can log on and try different experiments. The summary paper I did before would have to do with the serial position curve here. And I think that would be really nice for the students to do. And then we could follow up. That would sort of lead off the class for the in-class discussions and online discussions as well. And then again, using adaptive release, getting some short quizzes so that they can go through and make sure they're keeping up with the material on their own. That I wouldn't necessarily grade, but just that they could be using for review purposes. Okay, and I think, oh, there's my model. And questions? Yes?
Yeah, what sort of feedback are you giving them on these papers? Like, I was wondering when you had those 3 things, when do they find out what the correct answers are?
That's a good question, and I haven't actually graded these on here yet. On paper, I give a lot of feedback. I write all of them, and I write on feedback. So that's something I'm going to need to look into as to whether I can give feedback, and I haven't done a test yet.
Because I've seen these strategies, like when you have these, the short answers where if they get it wrong, then they automatically find out that it's wrong. They get like a second guess until they. So there's that way, as opposed to just they do it and then later on they get graded and find out that it's wrong. But it was unclear how they.
This just gave the answer. I've only used this. This is the very first time I've used it this way. But that would be kind of interesting. I might try that and see. I could try it in class and see if giving them a little feedback, because this is not really something. It's not a test. It really is meant to be a learning tool. So I like the idea of being able to provide them feedback and letting them try again. So for the short answer fill in the blank, that might be a good option. I would have to be careful. I debated whether to actually use the grading, though, because I found when I did it the first time, I had a typo, and I got it wrong. And I'm thinking, if I'm getting it wrong, it's going to be tough for the students.
So you're saying you're not grading these, like these statements that the longer ones, you don't grade those?
I grade those by hand. Those I rate them. I do it each week. I usually have done it on paper, take them to the library at night and grade them. And I try to give them a lot of feedback, because that's my way of finding out. One of the things I really like about the summary paper is not just that it gives them a chance to do a brain dump, but it also gives me a chance to see who's on track and who's not, what percentage of my students are there or not.
What is the weight in their overall course grade of these?
These in the past have come to 20% of the overall course grade. They usually do 11 of them over the course of the semester, and I drop 1. And they're usually 2 points each. I grade them on a 0, 1, 2. 0, they don't turn anything in. 2, they turn something in that was reasonably good, and 1 is mediocre. And then I give them a lot of written feedback on them. So if they make a good attempt, even if it's not really on target, they still can get a 2. I just give them, it's the written feedback. Hopefully they read it. That's the one part I don't know. And then I'll give them comments, good point, or what, I'll try to give them some feedback. This is a really good 2, or it's a weak 2.
If there's particular feedback that you want all students to have on one of those, like the question 2, sort of that there is a right or wrong answer to that.
Right.
You can, when you set up the question, there's a spot for feedback.
Yes.
So you can type feedback in there so that
no
matter what they wrote, you could say, well, here's the right answer, or blah, 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 or think about these concepts, or you should have touched on these concepts and used these particular terms, or whatever. The last question seemed to be much more personal, right? Because it's personal reflection about what do they do. So obviously no right or wrong answer there, but you might want to provide them with feedback.
Exactly, yeah. And I think the first time I created the quiz, I might have put something in where I put, because I always have used these in Blackboard, I post them the next week with my answers. And I'll give them an example for the personal one. So I'd say, for example, I might use method of loci for, whatever. So I think that's a great idea. And this way it would be right there in their face and they wouldn't be able to miss it quite as easily as having to go into Blackboard. They'd already be there because they'd be looking at their answers anyway.
Right, and then anytime they want to, they could go back and review, if that quiz is still available to them, they can go in and review their answers and review what your feedback was.
Right, yeah, that sounds great.
I was curious as to why you chose to use sort of a test or assessment engine as opposed to a document that they complete and turn in as an assignment.
I've actually used it as a document before. I posted it and have them do it. Now, I'm not super savvy on how the tests and assessments work. The one thing that happens when I've had them all turn in lots of papers is I end up having to go in, click, open papers, and for some reason I end up printing all those out. I don't know. I used an assessment once before to get feedback, and I seem to remember it being more, again, I didn't look to see how it comes back, but I thought it was more was it one file that comes back, or do you get a series of files?
I'm not challenging.
Oh,
I'm
no.
just curious as to what your thinking was.
My thinking was I'd get them all kind of at once and I could really look across. It was more for grading purposes, and I didn't know that if there was too much of a difference in terms of, some of them have trouble. When I give them a document, they start typing things and they move, it gets kind of jarbled up. They don't always get in the right places and put it back in. So sometimes it kind of messes up the document. I don't know. There's not really a bad thing about using the document, except for me, just opening each one was time consuming.
Well, one thing, and I can't remember, because with a test, it is not anonymous.
Tests are not anonymous, surveys are.
But as the instructor, when you go to look at attempt statistics, I think it will summarize what all of the responses are, even if they're short answer essay.
Oh.
What could be interesting is, I'm kind of playing with the adaptive release idea after they have done, the summary paper.
Right.
What you might be able to do is print a PDF of what you see as the instructor, so that they can see what everybody said, but I think it will be anonymous.
Right.
But they can't get to it until they've completed the summary paper.
So the PDF would be what?
So if you were to go back to your Blackboard site and look at the attempts for a given summary paper, what you would see, I believe, is sort of one long list of all of the responses to all those 3 questions.
Right.
If you really wanted to have a discussion, you could use that as sort of the primer for the discussion in terms of, having people compare their own responses to others. Now, they wouldn't know who the people are, but then it's a way for them to sort of see how their thinking is comparing with the class.
Yeah.
But because you've used the assessment engine and not a paper,
right,
that only is possible because now you have a summary as the instructor view. It's just the difference is that they can't see it by default. You would have to be the person who would have to look at it, print a PDF so that they can see what everybody has written, but they can only see it after they have submitted their own. So they can't go back and change it. But then what happens is that could be another way that you're using the class to compare notes with each other rather than this only being a summary paper that only you see. So creating a little bit
kind
more
of a discussion,
an opportunity for sort of peer learning through the engine that you've actually chosen here.
Yeah, especially question number 3, they might find, wow, no one else thought about the way, no one else gave the same example about how they learn that I did, know, but my answer is similar to these people, oh, I never thought about that answer. Wow, that's actually really cool. I do that too, but I didn't think about it, right?
Yeah, that I think actually I like that a lot. Yeah, the conceptual one, I'd probably, I can see that there can be validity to saying, oh, there's some people who aren't getting this concept and that's, we need to go over it some more, that's why. But I really do like that idea of taking the things that are personal, because they do come up with some really interesting ideas and some very creative things, and it would be a nice way to get them to sort of think outside of themselves, because they're at that point now where they can go from learning inside themselves to thinking how other people think and learn, and that's also what this course is about, so seeing other perspectives. So yeah, that could be really interesting.
So I'm going to just push you on one other thing.
Okay.
Now that you've got your summary paper, why not have the lecture online?
Because I like lecturing. I do like the interaction with students, and we do have in-class discussions even with 45 students. I really like having them. I like the talking part of it. And I think there are students who will do better in the classroom, and there are students who will do better online. And I think the hybrid, to me, gives both groups that option.
Would you consider recording your lecture?
Sure. Oh, yeah, I was actually thinking of doing that. I'd love to do that.
We've had some instructors that used MP3 recorders that if you just had an audio recording for the one thing that I don't disagree with you about, you know, wanting to be there face to face, but the one real pedagogical benefit I've heard about the recorded lectures is for students who can review and replay, that they will do it.
That would be good, yeah. And students who miss a class for some reason.
And, you know, to the extent that maybe, you know, you said that these summary papers, up to this point that they do them, it's basically open book, anything that's been in the class. The only problem is they can't replay your lecture. So, as a review tool, the one thing they can't do is review your lecture.
So that would give them access to that.
If you were to say, okay, here's my lecture, we're going to meet in class, but it's only available to you, you know, when in some form of adaptive release. That's what Tamara in biology Mendelsohn is doing. You could, you know, there's some ways that you could put it up there so that it's not an attendance issue where they can only see it. There might be even a question that's on the lecture that they have to answer to be able to satisfy the adaptive release rule. There's a couple of ways you can do it. You can also have some abuse where some students will pass around the code or stuff like that. But it could be interesting to have the review capability as one of the outcomes of the hybridization of this face-to-face assignment, because there's no review when they are completing it.
I have a question about that and possible alternatives. So when you say put the lecture online or whatever, it sounds like you're meaning put a recording of what she actually says or does up there. But do you do your lectures PowerPoint?
I do.
So the issue, and I don't do PowerPoint yet, but I'm thinking of it. The fall, but I've got fear about this is basically you provide access to the PowerPoint slides, but not the lecture, and so that's sort of like an intermediate thing. So if they have the PowerPoint slides, they do have a review document about what, you know, but then she's providing something over. But my fear is if I do that, will they come to class? You know, if you.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would be my concern too, of course. I mean, I always do post PowerPoint slides, and the way I tend to do PowerPoint slides for classes, I give them 50 to 60% of the information on PowerPoint, and then I expect they print them out with the little notes so they can take notes, and then I talk, and we have discussions, and then they fill in the PowerPoint slides. So the PowerPoint slides alone aren't the whole lecture.
You do hand out the PowerPoint slides.
I post them on Blackboard, and they're responsible for printing. Yeah, if they want to bring them to class, they can. Some students come with computers now, so they type in class. You know, I do take attendance just to see who's there, and I use that. I try not to use it strictly as, you know, point for being there, but I will tell students that if for a student who's doing really well in the class, if they haven't attended class, they're not going to get a lower grade because of it. I value them being there because they're an important part of the class, but I don't necessarily fail someone because they didn't come to class. But then I also tell students, if you're having trouble and you haven't come to class, don't say, you know, what can I do to raise my grade if you're not attending classes?
Do you use clickers?
Yes.
So
and I can get their,
so you could ask a clicker question and show that they were there.
Now our clickers at Shady Grove, we use Turning Point,
That's what we were
and
doing,
the students don't keep their own clickers. We hand them out at the beginning of class and collect them at the end. So bookkeeping wise, I haven't yet gotten a good system down for tying students to their clickers. Because they get arbitrary. We collect them in a box. There are 50 of them. They get different numbers every day. I asked them in the sign-in sheet to put their clicker number, but I'd have to go back and map each student to their clicker. It's not terrible, but that's what I would do to get back their feedback.
Well, for the first deliverable, converting what you've done to hybrid, it sounds good. There's a couple of spin-off, you know, ideas that may be half-baked, you know, and so it's not that great of an idea, but you know, it might be something to think about for the second deliverable, you know, sort of an add-on to that, either through the peer learning, through adaptive release in the discussion board, maybe something where you're adding a review capability to your otherwise face-to-face, for them, impromptu lecture. Might be some interesting things there, but just sneak peek, what are you thinking for the second deliverable?
For the second deliverable, I was thinking about trying the model building option, trying to look at that, or just using one of the COG Lab experiments, doing a follow-up to that. That's a little more time consuming to have my peer reviewers do, because the experiments tend to run, I think these tend to run fairly long, but I was going to look at the two of those. But I could also look at the summer paper with some sort of adaptive release follow-up.
One other question I had on the summary paper. Are you worried about sort of security during the 24-hour period in terms of either collaboration or doing, like with these quiz questions, getting, the information other ways that may not be, you may not think are really legitimate?
I mean, I try to explain to the students that the summary papers really are meant to be a benefit for them, and I don't grade be really tough. They really, as long as they get something reasonable and I see that they've made an attempt, they'll do well.
I mean, how do you know that they're going to be the ones that do these?
I don't, and it's true, they could be working in a group or they could be working with other students. I mean, obviously, if I read them and I see this exact same answer, I probably put up some red flags, but it's really more of an exercise of doing it. It doesn't take that long, so they're kind of putting themselves in jeopardy for something that's not a big payoff to them. It doesn't really seem worth it, but you're right, students could do that.
It sounds like they could do that in your class.
Yeah.
That last 15 minutes, if they're sort of talking and
and I've never prohibited them from talking. I mean, I started doing this because when I was in grad school, I would go back after my classes and take all my notes and rewrite and draw diagrams, and I found that to be incredibly helpful because the information's in your head for a short while, and that's why I teach in cognitive psychology, and then little by little it dissipates and you no longer have as much information. So the idea is capture it while you can, get out of class, do something, whether it's rewriting your notes or putting it in the summary paper. And the summary paper to me is a method for them to just offload that information. They can keep the summary papers, they can review them, and again, if I combine stuff, they can use that to review for quizzes. It's really meant to be more of a help to them. They may or may not get that, but if they do, then it's positive, and if not, I mean, I will use exams, and the exams are still going to be in class because I do worry about that. So they'll have their regular exams in class. And I will plan to have discussions online. I'll be monitoring, and I do get a feel for who's participating and who seems to know what's going on, both through what they do in class and by what they do online. The class usually doesn't get that big that I don't know my students. So I usually know from
I'm not saying this is a prohibitive factor, I'm just wondering how.
No, but you're right. It is possible. It's possible with papers they turn into, and it's unfortunate. I'd like to think they're not doing that, especially on something like this.
How big are the classes?
I think right now we have it set about 45, maybe 50 was what we'll end up with. So in a class that size, I mean, this classroom, whatever, I do know my students, and a lot of them are also my advisees because we have a small group down there. So I kind of know. I have a general idea of, who's working hard, and maybe if someone is getting perfect scores on all their summary papers but failing their tests, it would be something to look into.
Do you tell them why you did this assignment?
Yes, you mean the idea of the offloading the information? Yeah, I put that as part of the class.
Your own experience in terms of what you did in grad school? Great.
Yeah, I also have them use, there are other things I do in class, and I try to explain why, like we use cheat sheets, and the idea of bringing in a piece of paper that they can use for their exams, and we tie it into the class itself, which is why I really like this class, because they can use it to learn how to study better for quizzes and exams and write papers.
And hopefully the rest of their classes.
Hopefully, yes. And hopefully for life in general.
Yeah.
That's the dream.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks very much, Diane.
Thank you. All right. Great. Thank you. Coming up.
Linda, shall we have you on? Okay.